tenuous. Why don't we start with H205? And for committee members, you can, I know, find that on last Friday's page.
It should be on today's page.
Today's
now.
page also, okay. H205. So we looked at this bill the Wednesday, I think, of the week that we were here, and went through the draft, had a couple of decision points that we noted, and then in the intervening days, Representative Cipernat has worked with Mike O'Grady to get some new language in, and I'm sure it's highlighted. Yes. So why don't we, Mike, why don't we turn it over to you and have you walk through it?
Okay. Do you want it up on the screen?
If you're able to do that.
Sure,
And
let me try.
Okay.
Is this draft 4.1?
I need to be given host capability.
Just did.
Okay, thanks.
Is that turning very slowly?
It's not turning at all.
What would be turning?
Okay, can everyone see the screen?
Well, we can see the screen, but we can't see the language.
What do you see?
Something very alien looking. It says
All right.
screen. Yeah, it's not something I've seen before. It's a Zoom
All right.
announcement.
It says
Okay, hold on.
a cast with a red dot circle around it on the top.
Okay.
You want to
All right, let me try that again. I'm
Try
gonna
again. If it
do
doesn't load, we can
one
manage that.
thing. Okay, hold on 1 second. I'm just reloading the committee website. I think that might be what caused the problem. All right, now let me try Zoom again.
Okay.
All right, how about now?
No.
Now,
Laura, can you poke on one of those dots?
can you put it on the screen for us?
I could. It just makes it a little difficult for me.
Yeah, I think
Right.
I'd rather not ask Laura to do that because she has to manage it while she's trying to do her
Got it.
other work. So
We can just follow along.
yeah, I think we probably will just we'll just follow along on our own devices.
Okay. So if you are looking at the newest draft, it's draft number 4.1 with the March 2nd, 2023 date and a 5:28 p.m. timestamp. I'll just walk through the changes. The first change is on line 10. There used to be a definition section that led off the new small farmer diversification and transition program. And Representative Cipernat noted that it was a little clunky to start off the program with those definitions because they're a little technical. So we moved those definitions to the end of the section instead of leading off the section with them. And then on lines 16 through 19, there were changes made to better identify first what the diversification of farm products, and you'll see a definition of that at the end of the bill, and that they're produced by the applicant instead of it saying the person or the farmer, et cetera. It's the person that is applying for the grant. And so those were the changes that were made on 16 through 19. It's clarifying what the diversification is and by whom. You'll see that subsection B used to be subsection C. And then on page 2, lines 8 and 9, you had previously requested as part of the criteria that the applicant is not a medium farm or large farm, but you asked that it be at the time of application. So it's possible that they're a small farm when they apply, they use the grant, they diversify, they build an accessory on-farm business, and they could grow into a medium or large farm, and that would not prohibit them underneath the business plan that they submit. And then page 3, lines 1 through 3, there was Representative Supranant and I believe the committee's desire to have this not be a first come, first serve application process, and therefore to have the application open for a time being. So annually, the application will open November 1st and then shall close the application period on December 31st of each year. So there's effectively 2 months for applications to be submitted and received. And then on page 3, basically beginning with line 7 through 15, there had been the discussion about how, if you're not going to have a first come, first serve process, will you choose or will you direct the secretary to choose which applicant should receive a grant? So I basically went with a request for proposal model where there are criteria that are submitted and then they're given weights. So the secretary shall evaluate applications based on the following criteria, which shall be weighted equally. So each of the following 2 criteria are given equal weight, 50-50. The potential from the proposed diversification or transition to create additional income for the small farmer, and the viability of the possible markets identified in the plan for the proposed product. And so in an RFE process or a grant process like this, the secretary will assign points to each of the criteria based on the applicant's proposal. And then those points are added up. And then the secretary, you'll see this on lines 13 through 15, shall award grants to the applicants according to the total weighted scores, beginning with the highest score until all funds are expended. So it's no longer a first come, first serve. It's going to be based on which proposals, which applications are considered to be the best, and then in a descending order until all funds are expended. So then moving on from there, you get to the definition section, which it had been at the beginning, but now it's at the end. Farm products, which is related to the diversification, means crops grown, growing, or to be grown. So they don't actually have to be in the activity of growing the crops at the time of application, because that might be part of their diversification. So, and then it will include plants grown for food, feed, and fiber, but excluding trees grown for timber. But it will include Christmas trees and it will include maple sap because they traditionally are defined as farming in Vermont. It will also include horticultural, viticultural, or orchard crops and pasture. It will also include livestock born or unborn. So that's also part of your diversification. So you might be looking to get into the business of beef cattle, including goods produced in an agricultural operation. So it's going to include fish as well. And it's not limited to cultured trout, which some of the other definitions in statute are. And then it will also include products of crops or livestock produced by the small farmer. When you see the definition of small farmer, you had previously looked at the first 2 subdivisions, 2A and 2B. Basically, one is half of the income is from farming as defined by the IRS, and the second is half of your income is gained from being engaged in farming as defined by Act 250. But then you also wanted any small farm that could qualify for the RAPs to be eligible. And that's what is added on line 14 on page 4. And then the last change is increasing the appropriation from, 250 to 500.
Okay. So thank you, Mike. Questions or feedback, Representative Levitt?
I like the changes very much, but I have a question, because there's that line, I can't find it now, until all the money is expended. What happens do we have to have a contingency in case there aren't enough applications and we still have money left? Because we have a $15,000 cap on a grant as the maximum. So I'm just.
So what happens there is the money remains with the agency, and then in budget adjustment, it basically is reallocated when you have a grant program that doesn't use all of its funds, unless you say that they can waterfall it to something else.
Okay.
Then it just goes back into the budget adjustment process.
And we don't need to explain that. Like, that's just what happens.
That's just what happens.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Graham?
So over the break, I heard from an Organic Valley member that at the Organic Valley's annual meeting, which is usually held the first part of May, is an agenda item that if you ship less than 2,000 pounds of milk pickup, that you're gonna get dropped. And if that happens, I can foresee maybe more participation in this program. But if they're forced out in 2023 and this doesn't take effect in 2024, is there a way to make it so that if they were making milk in 2023 that they would be eligible to, even if they're not shipping the whole year? It's just a question. I don't know what Heather thinks about that.
Well, first, the act goes into effect on July 1, 2023. And if the appropriation goes forward, it'll probably, if not definitely, be for fiscal year 24. So it will open up, the application period will open up in November of 23. So there is opportunity for the program to start in 23. You're right, the money probably won't be awarded until 2024. But I think your question also is related to the underlying need for assistance for organic dairy, which your committee has already supported. I think in the event that a farmer is farming in 2023 and then stops farming, and then is looking for assistance for transitioning, that's probably something you want to look at the organic program. The way that you had set up the organic appropriation, it wouldn't have really mattered if they had gone out, because it was based on what they had produced in the prior calendar year. But I don't believe that's the model that the Senate's going to follow. So that's it's a intriguing question as to whether or not that program will be available to that type of organic farmer who goes out of business. This will be available, but it might not be available till 2024.
Representative O'Brien?
Mike, I don't have the bill up now, toggling back to Zoom, but it looked like on 18 when it talks about processing a product on a farm owned by the applicant. I'm just wondering, in the case of a lot of farmers lease land, especially these small farmers who might be getting into farming or in farming but want to go to the next level. does it include sort of things like leasing? And then the question also of around us anyway, they're more and more sort of almost like community gardens. They're like community farms. And would those groups have to sort of legally apply, as an LLC? Is that possible with this?
So first, I think it probably should say a farm owned or controlled by the applicant.
Yeah.
And then that will both take into account the leaseholds and some of those community gardens, because basically you enter into, if it's not a leasehold, it's a shareholder. So you have ownership interest or control interest there as well. And I do believe that an LLC can apply for this as well, if that's the alternative that the applicant wants to take. And some farms are already LLCs.
That's true, yeah.
Family or brothers or friends, so they can still apply.
Okay, good, thank you.
Mike, I was just wondering about the date not in the effective date, but the appropriation, fiscal year 2024. So if this bill is approved as written and the 500,000 is granted and made available and then spent, what has to happen in order to get money into the program in the next fiscal year?
So in fiscal year 2025,
Right.
so an appropriation would need to be made for fiscal year 2025, because you can't bind, as much as you try, you can't bind future legislators in what and how much they appropriate. So that's why the budget bill is usually just a session law one. There's a provision in the budget bill that says it applies only to that fiscal year unless otherwise noted. So that it would, remember, this is now going to be a statutory program. This is going into statute. It's not a session law program. And so every year the agency should be proposing something for an appropriation in the governor's budget. And then it will be up to you to adjust whatever amount you want to go to that program for each fiscal year. Kind of like what you do for working lands.
Up to us and future legislatures. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And just to remind the committee, when we put together the letter to the appropriations committee last week or 2 weeks ago, we included the 250 as base and then the other 250 as one time as our recommendation. Go ahead, Mike.
Just wondering, so $500,000 for fiscal year 24, the application period is open through the December 31st, then decisions start to be made, and then it very quickly becomes time for BAA and the possibility that these funds would be adjusted away if they hadn't been expended. So is there ever a provision to say that the funds should actually stay with the program in that case? Even if
Yes, you can do that if you would like. You can say that the money not expended in fiscal year 2024 shall be retained by the agency for purposes of administering the program in 2025. That kind of works in a biennium, but when you try to carry it over from one biennium to another, that's when it sort of breaks down. So you can do that, and you just did that last year for the DMC program, where you appropriated money and then you said the agency can keep the remainder for administration of DMC in this fiscal year. You can do the same. You can do the same thing. I will note that, and I think I've said it before, when the bill moves to the appropriations committee, they'll probably just take section 2 out, and figure out how they're going to incorporate the appropriation into the Agency of Agriculture's budget.
And so the DMC, the dairy
Dairy margin coverage.
coverage, yeah. So in that in that example, I think that's a good example. The last year's bill or budget said if there's any money left over, put it into this year's program. The legislature still has to approve that for the same reasons you discussed earlier.
Yep, correct. But it's easier to do that when it's the same legislator in the same biennium. When you start crossing into different legislatures and different bienniums, that's when it starts to break down. Although DMC was cross bienniums and it's held up, but it's just a kind of reality check that's when you try to future appropriate money, that's really when it starts to break down.
Okay, any other questions, Heather, or comments?
No, I feel all set with it if the committee feels all set and had their questions answered.
Can I ask if you want those changes? The change that Representative O'Brien noted on page 1, line 18, where it should say on the farm owned or controlled by the applicant. And then the language that Representative Rice noted of whether or not you allow the agency to carry forward any unexpended money into the next fiscal year for the administration of the program.
So
sorry.
Heather, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I am comfortable with those changes and would leave it to the committee's discretion as well.
It feels like the first instance is more technical or legalistic, and seems like a good idea. The other question is a bit more of a policy decision on whether to have any unspent funds roll over to indicate that our intent is to have them roll over or not. So thoughts on that from the committee?
I would just say that it may end up looking like a policy decision, but I was raising more of a sort of just simple timeline, potential timeline problem where the end of the application period runs pretty much right up against the time when the funds would be potentially adjusted away. And would there actually be enough time to award all those funds?
I see. So that, okay, that's then, and Mike, just to be sure that now I am not sure that I understand either what would happen. So none of the funds will be granted until after the first of the year. So the application deadline is December 31st. There'd be decisions made over the course of some period of time and then the awards made. So in that case, is the money considered fully, if there were $500,000 worth of requests, would it be fully spent? Can't hear you.
If it's committed like that, like the agency has awarded the grant, including with the condition that you don't get the full amount of the grant, you get 90% of the grant, and then you get your 10% at the end once you've met the agency's benchmark. That's committed. That's money that is not unappropriated. So it wouldn't go to budget adjustment. That would be out.
I can imagine a scenario, and maybe this is what Representative Rice was thinking of too, that so we were working on budget adjustment essentially January 15th. And easy to imagine that whoever's sitting down and starting to go through the applications still won't have made any decisions by January 15th.
The agency generally reviews applications on a rolling basis, even when you have this period, the open period like this. So I don't think I think you'll have opportunity to get this money out well before budget adjustment is passed. Remember, budget adjustment doesn't pass until the first week of March at the earliest and the last week of March at the latest. So I think the agency will be able to move that money pretty quickly once the application period is closed.
Representative O'Brien.
Mike, just one more question on development of accessory on-farm business. Can development, is it defined somewhere? Can that mean both, to go from scratch, from zero to something, a business, accessory on-farm business? Or could it also mean going from, a little roadside farm stand to, a full-on farm store? Are those both development, or is there statutory language?
There isn't statutory language for the use of development in this context. It's not like Act 250 development. I think that will be up to the agency and what they're going to allow in that accessory on-farm business criteria or category.
Yeah. Okay.
Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, my question concerning Representative Rice's concern, which I think is a good one. Were there productivity reasons why we didn't choose September 1st for an opening date for applications and October 31st, or for a closing date that's the same 2 months length of period, but it allows action prior to the end of the close of the year, which ends December 31st.
So generally making an ag application deadline in September or October has historically not gone over very well with the farming community.
That's why I asked.
Okay. So it sounds like the timing actually is not a big concern in terms of meeting the BAA. There's still the policy question that we can leave as is, or we can decide to use language, to build in some language that says the money will roll over into the program.
And remember, if the max award is given to all the awardees, it's 33 grants. It's not a huge number of grants. So even if there's less than the maximum awarded to some, you're probably talking in the neighborhood of 30 to 50 grants. I think the agency can handle that in that time frame.
Okay, so thoughts on whether or not to have the money roll over? Heather indicated earlier, I think, that she's fine with having it roll over, but doesn't feel strongly.
I think it should roll over.
Okay. All right, I'm seeing a few nods. So Mike, yeah, if you want to make that change as well, so that'd be two changes.
Chair?
Representative O'Brien.
Sort of similar was the local food incentive purchasing. Like that wasn't fully subscribed, right? So did that roll over, or did that get just sent back to the general fund?
Did not roll up. Well, go ahead. I don't think so.
I did not draft that, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't recall any language in there saying it would roll over. I think we heard that it was, as you say, it was undersubscribed, and that just was the end of that.
And was it in base, or was it one time too, I guess?
There's some question about that. I think it was, I think it was intended to be in the base.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's our request or our recommendation for next year.
Yeah.
So, Mike, do you have enough clarity on those two changes
Yes.
for, I'm going to finish with this. Now you can say no then if you want. For us to vote on a draft 5.1, which we don't have in front of us, but would look like 4.1 with those two changes.
Yep, that's fine with me. I just asked that in your motion, you'd say draft 5.1 with the changes requested and as approved by the chair. So you can look at it, chair, and say, oh, Mike, you screwed up here. You need to change something. So that's part of your motion.
Okay. I don't expect you to screw up, but I will include that in the motion or ask that it be included if anyone would like to make that motion. And Representative Pearl, do you have a score sheet? While we're waiting for that, would anybody like to make the motion? And we can get assistance from Mike just in the wording as we're going here.
I'd be happy to make.
Representative Lipsky. All right, so Representative Lipsky has moved.
I move that we approve the H205, the 5.1 proposed addition with the amendment, the two amendments which we added in the last 20 minutes, and subject to the approval of our chairman, Chairman Durfee, not to come back to the full committee.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Representative Wilson. Now, I think procedurally what we're doing is first voting on an amendment to H205 and then voting out the bill as amended. Do I have that right, Mike?
I think technically you're correct, but not all committees do that.
Well, we want to be correct. That's interesting to know, though. So we'll go ahead then and
I'll
call the roll, please.
I'll call the roll on the amendment first.
The two amendments.
So this is the bill as amended.
Oh, God, okay, sorry, right.
With what we're current, so it's not only what we're looking at, but in addition, those two things. Yeah. So that's, that in totality is the amendment to the original bill. Got it.
Representative Esme Cole,
Yes.
Representative Rodney Graham,
Yes.
Representative Josie Levitt,
Yes.
Representative Jed Lipsky,
Yes.
Representative John O'Brien.
We can't vote, can we?
I should have said beforehand, so you can use one of your three lifetime, not lifetime, but so I'm sorry to jump in here in the middle of the vote, but I should have said earlier, the House adopted a new set of rules 2 weeks ago. You can abstain, you can vote, but if you do vote, that's one of the three that you get this year, this session. So if you want to.
Days, right? 3 days of remote voting.
3 days, yes, yeah, 3 days of remote voting, yeah.
Oh, so this would become one of the days?
Yes, yeah.
You know, I think that some of us are online here, that it might make the most sense if it's not out of line to do a straw poll on this too, and then whoever reports it could explain the weather issue, and that, you know, perhaps it'll be unanimous, just showing the same thing. So we don't have to use up one of our very limited days.
Okay, so are you going to abstain then? Or
Yeah, I'll abstain.
Yeah, out, okay.
Representative Henry Pearl, yes. Representative Mike Rice,
Yes.
Representative Heather Supernaut,
Yes.
Representative David Templeman,
Yes.
Representative Charles Wilson,
Yes.
Representative David Durfee.
Yes.
And the vote on the amendment is 10-0-1.
Good. Now, let's have a motion to, would entertain a motion to approve the bill as amended. And then, as Representative O'Brien suggested, after that vote, I think we can do a straw poll to help the committee reporter convey the view of the entire committee.
Okay, so now voting on the bill, or we need a motion.
I'll move to approve the bill as amended.
Is there a second?
Okay, so now I'll call the roll on the bill as recommended. But just as a straw poll.
No, this will be the actual.
Okay, this will be the
Yeah,
actual vote.
the actual vote.
Straw poll. Okay. Okay, to vote on the bill as recommended. Representative Esme Cole,
Yes.
Representative Rodney Graham,
Yes.
Representative Josie Levitt,
Yes.
Representative Jed Lipsky,
Yes.
Representative John O'Brien,
Abstain.
Representative Henry Pearl, yes. Representative Mike Rice,
Yes.
Representative Heather Supranant,
Yes.
Representative David Templeman,
Yes.
Representative Charles Wilson,
Yes.
Representative David Durfee.
Yes.
The vote tally is 10-0-1 in favor.
Now, why don't we just ask whether anybody who abstained in a straw poll wants to vote?
I vote yes.
Thanks, John. I think that was a good suggestion, and we'll take advantage of that in the future, I'm sure. So let's take, thank you, committee, for your support of that bill. Representative Supranant, I think you've expressed a willingness to report the bill.
Yes.
All right, so we will be in touch with you then about procedures with the clerk's office. It will go on the notice calendar, I would imagine, tomorrow, Wednesday, and likely be up for second reading then on Thursday. Subject to change, but just be prepared for that.
It's got to go to appropriations.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you. I forgot it has an appropriation in it, so we'll take all that back. It'll go on the notice calendar tomorrow, but then it will go to appropriations, yeah. Okay, good. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll look at the miscellaneous housekeeping bill. And we only have until 2:30 to do that, so let's just make this 5 minutes, if that's okay with everyone.